The morning after the massacre, the grisly scene at the Clark Street garage was discovered by a delivery driver. The bodies of McCarthy's men lay lifeless, the walls riddled with bullet holes, and the stench of gunpowder hung heavy in the air. The news of the slaughter quickly spread, sending shockwaves through Chicago and across the nation. The newspapers dubbed it the Valentine's Day Massacre, a name that would forever be etched into the annals of crime history. Vince McCarthy, already hardened by years of ruthless dealings, was devastated by the loss of his most trusted men. Danny "the Bear" O'Sullivan had been like a brother to him, and the other men were seasoned enforcers who had stood by him through countless battles. As McCarthy stood over their coffins, his grief quickly turned to a cold, burning rage. He swore vengeance against Dom Luciano and his entire operation. The massacre wasn't just an attack on his men, it was a direct challenge to his power, a challenge he intended to meet with ferocity. Within days, the city of Chicago was engulfed in a new wave of violence. McCarthy's men, fueled by their boss's thirst for revenge, launched a series of brutal retaliations. Safe houses were raided, speakeasies were torched, and anyone suspected of being loyal to Luciano found themselves in the crosshairs. The streets became a battlefield, and the body count soared as the gang war spiraled out of control. Dom Luciano, meanwhile, knew that McCarthy's retaliation was inevitable. He fortified his own operations, bringing in extra muscle and tightening security around his most valuable assets. But Luciano was not a man to be intimidated. He struck back with equal ferocity, targeting McCarthy's businesses and turning the once bustling North Side into a war zone. The violence spilled over into the lives of ordinary citizens, and the public, already wary of the gangsters who controlled their city, began to demand action. The Chicago Police Department, long known for its corruption and ties to organized crime, found itself under immense pressure to restore order. But as the violence escalated, it became clear that the local police were ill-equipped and unwilling to bring the gangs to justice. Their efforts were half-hearted at best, hampered by bribery, intimidation, and outright fear of the powerful mob bosses who held the city in a stranglehold. It was at this critical juncture that federal law enforcement stepped in. The Bureau of Investigation, the forerunner to the FBI, dispatched one of its top agents to Chicago, Elliot Nash. Nash was known for his tenacity and incorruptibility, a man who couldn't be bought or bullied. He arrived in Chicago with a single mission: to bring down Vince McCarthy, Dom Luciano, and the entire criminal empire they had built. Nash's investigation began with the Valentine's Day Massacre. He pored over crime scene photos, autopsy reports, and witness statements, piecing together the events of that fateful morning. What he discovered was a city rotten with corruption, where the lines between law enforcement and organized crime were dangerously blurred. Nash's inquiries uncovered a web of deceit that reached the highest levels of the Chicago Police Department, implicating several officers who had turned a blind eye to the violence in exchange for bribes and favors. Despite the danger, Nash refused to back down. He knew that taking down McCarthy and Luciano would require more than just gathering evidence, it would require dismantling the entire system that had allowed them to thrive. Nash began to build a case, not only against the gangsters, but also against the corrupt officials who protected them. He recruited a team of agents he could trust, men who shared his commitment to justice and who were willing to risk everything to see the job through. As Nash closed in on his targets, the tension in Chicago reached a boiling point. Both McCarthy and Luciano were aware that the noose was tightening around their necks, but neither was willing to back down. Their feud had become a war of attrition, with each man determined to outlast the other, no matter the cost. For Vince McCarthy, revenge was no longer enough. He wanted to destroy Dom Luciano completely, to erase his rival's name from the history books and claim Chicago as his own. For Dom Luciano, the stakes were equally high. He had built his empire from the ground up, and he wasn't about to let a grieving mob boss or a meddling federal agent tear it all down. The city braced itself for the final showdown, knowing that when it came, the streets of Chicago would once again run red with blood.